3 days after my husband's funeral, my phone rang while I was still sitting beside the untouched cup of coffee he had promised we would share together. His attorney introduced himself with a calm voice and said there was something my husband had left behind that.
If you love stories where karma always wins in the end, subscribe to Karma Effect.
Claim. I expected paperwork, perhaps a forgotten insurance document. Instead, he told me my husband owned a luxury penthouse I had never heard of. For a moment, I believed he had called the wrong widow. My husband and I had shared every paycheck, every worry, every ordinary dream. We never had enough money for extravagant secrets. Yet, an hour later, I was standing inside a building so elegant it barely felt real. The attorney unlocked the apartment without saying much, then quietly stepped aside. Everything inside looked untouched. A jacket rested over the sofa, exactly as if he had removed it the night before. A book remained open on a table. Fresh flowers still stood in a crystal vase. Even the air carried the faint scent of his favorite cologne. It felt less like an empty home than a life. Interrupted in the middle of an ordinary evening, I slowly walked through each room, searching for an explanation that never came. Then I reached a hallway where one heavy wooden door stood closed. Unlike every other polished handle in the apartment, this one carried unmistakable fresh fingerprints. Someone had touched it recently. The attorney stopped several steps behind me before speaking again. Your husband left one final instruction, he said quietly. No one opens that room except you. I reached toward the handle with trembling fingers, but my heartbeat suddenly warned me that whatever waited behind that door would change. Far more than my understanding of my husband's life, it would change mine forever. 15 years is long enough to believe you know every corner of another person's heart. Looking back now, I realize I knew the man my husband chose to show me, and I loved him with every part of myself. He was gentle without being weak, dependable without seeking praise, and hardworking in ways that often left him exhausted before dinner. Even on difficult days, he greeted me with the same quiet smile that first made me believe I had found a safe place to spend the rest of my life. We never lived extravagantly. Our home was comfortable rather than impressive, filled with ordinary furniture, family photographs, and the familiar routines that slowly become a marriage. Saturday mornings belonged to coffee on the porch. Sunday evenings meant planning the week together. We laughed about growing old, imagining a little cottage beside the sea where we would finally have time to watch sunsets instead of clocks. Those dreams felt more valuable than wealth because we had built them together. His work required frequent business trips. Whenever he packed another suitcase, he kissed my forehead, promised he would not be gone long, and always returned carrying thoughtful little gifts that reflected how closely he paid attention to me. Sometimes it was my favorite tea. Other times it was a novel by an author I had mentioned only once. Those small gestures convinced me that distance had never weakened our bond. There were moments that should have raised questions, yet love has a quiet way of explaining away uncertainty. His phone occasionally rang late at night, and he would step outside before answering. He kept one leather briefcase locked, saying confidential business papers had to remain protected. I once found expensive restaurant receipts from cities he claimed he barely visited, but he smiled and blamed client meetings. His explanations sounded reasonable because I wanted them to be. The memory that returned most often after his death was the expression on his face whenever he thought I was not watching. It was not guilt. It was something heavier, as though he carried a responsibility too dangerous to share. Whenever I asked if everything was all right, he squeezed my hand and told me he simply wanted to keep life's burdens away from me. I believed him without hesitation. Standing inside that secret penthouse, surrounded by pieces of a life I had never known existed, those forgotten memories no longer felt harmless. They began fitting together like fragments of a picture I was only starting to recognize, and I could not decide whether I was about to uncover a heartbreaking betrayal or a truth far more complicated. The following morning, I returned to the penthouse alone. Grief still weighed heavily on me, but curiosity had quietly begun competing with it, I told myself. I was simply organizing my husband's belongings before making any decisions. Deep inside, however, I knew I was searching for answers I had never imagined needing. The bedroom closet was the first thing that unsettled me. Hanging neatly inside were tailored suits worth more than anything we had ever purchased together. The labels belonged to luxury designers I recognized only from magazine advertisements. Beside them sat polished shoes in perfect condition, expensive watches carefully arranged inside a velvet display case. None of it resembled the practical man who spent years reminding me that money should be saved for our future. The kitchen felt even stranger. Fresh fruit rested in a bowl. Milk inside the refrigerator had not expired. A loaf of bread remained soft enough to suggest it had been purchased only days earlier. Someone had stalked this apartment recently. My husband had already been gone for nearly a week. That realization settled heavily in my chest, hoping the building's security system might provide clarity. I asked the manager if I could review the entrance recordings. His polite smile faded almost instantly. He explained that some footage had been corrupted during a software update, leaving several unexplained gaps. His answer sounded rehearsed rather than unfortunate. Whenever I asked another question, he glanced toward the hallway as though worried someone might overhear us. As I left his office, an elderly woman watering plants outside her apartment greeted me kindly. When she learned I was my husband's wife, genuine surprise crossed her face. She apologized before mentioning she had seen him entering the penthouse only a few days before the accident. According to her, he had not been alone. A younger woman had accompanied him, carrying several folders while speaking urgently. My heart tightened, yet something about her description felt strangely ordinary. She never mentioned affection between them, only purpose. Back inside the apartment, I searched more carefully than before. Hidden beneath folded sweaters inside a dresser drawer, I found a second mobile phone switched off beside a small key I had never seen. Nearby lay a leather planner, opened to future appointments, stretching months beyond the day my husband died. Meetings and handwritten reminders filled the pages with careful precision. He had expected to be alive, standing in that silent room, surrounded by evidence that refused to fit together. One question became impossible to ignore. If my husband had made plans for a future he never reached, then who had continued coming to the penthouse after his death, and what were they desperately trying to protect? Unlocking the second phone took longer than I expected. I almost gave up twice, telling myself that whatever I found could only deepen the pain I was already carrying. Yet the questions had become louder than my fear. When the screen finally opened, my hands were shaking so badly that I had to place the phone on the dining table before I could begin reading. The messages started months before my husband's death. Most were brief, practical, and carefully worded. Mixed among them, however, were records of regular bank transfers to a younger woman whose name I had never heard. There were payments for rent, medical expenses, and travel. My heart sank with every transaction. The evidence seemed impossible to explain away. I felt as though 15 years of trust were quietly collapsing beneath me. For several minutes, I could barely breathe. Every memory I treasured suddenly felt uncertain. I wondered whether every business trip had really been another life, waiting beyond my reach. I questioned every late arrival, every unexplained meeting, every reassuring smile that had once brought me comfort. Grief slowly gave way to humiliation, and that transformation hurt even more than losing him. The memorial service became unbearable once I recognized her. She stood near the back of the room, dressed in simple black, speaking politely with several of my husband's former colleagues. She never approached me directly, yet I caught her watching me more than once. Whenever our eyes met, she lowered her gaze before quietly continuing her conversations. Someone introduced her as a business associate who had worked closely with my husband on several projects. No one offered further explanation. That was enough for rumors to begin. I overheard distant relatives exchanging quiet whispers they believed I could not hear. One suggested I had been too trusting. Another wondered how a wife could remain unaware of such obvious secrets. Their sympathy slowly turned into silent judgment. No one accused me openly, yet every glance carried the same uncomfortable question. Had everyone recognized the truth except me? I left the service feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my life. That evening, I returned to the penthouse and read every message again, this time forcing myself to slow down. The financial support was undeniable, but the conversations themselves lacked the intimacy I expected. There were no declarations of love, no flirtation, no private jokes shared between secret lovers. Instead, they discussed appointments, documents, deadlines, and meetings. My husband repeatedly reminded her to remain careful and avoid attracting attention. One message stopped me completely. She had thanked him for protecting her after someone had begun following her. His reply was even stranger. No one can know what we're working on until everything is finished. I read those words several times. They refused to fit the betrayal I had already convinced myself was true. For the first time since unlocking that phone, I realized the obvious explanation might also be the wrong one. If my husband had truly been hiding an affair, why did every conversation sound more like two people carrying a dangerous responsibility than lovers hiding a romance? For the first time since my husband's death, I stopped allowing my emotions to make decisions for me. The whispers at the memorial still echoed in my mind, but confronting anyone without knowing the truth would only give those rumors more power. If my husband had hidden something, I owed both him and myself the patience to understand why. Silence became my greatest protection. I quietly hired a private investigator recommended by the attorney, someone with experience tracing financial transactions rather than exposing personal scandals. While he began reviewing my husband's business connections, I spent long evenings studying bank statements, tax records, and contracts that had once seemed too complicated to understand. Gradually, familiar names appeared again and again beside unusually large transfers, shell companies, and unexplained consulting fees. When I met privately with the attorney, he answered only the questions he was legally permitted to discuss. Even so, his careful choice of words revealed something important. He never described my husband as a dishonest man. Instead, he repeatedly called him cautious. Before I left, he quietly reminded me that my husband had trusted me to make the right decisions when the time finally came. His confidence strengthened me more than he probably realized. I returned to the penthouse with fresh determination. This time, I searched every room slowly instead of emotionally. While dusting a bookshelf in the study, I noticed faint scratches across the wooden floor beneath it. The shelves shifted more easily than expected, revealing a narrow compartment hidden behind the wall. Inside rested organized folders, encrypted storage drives, surveillance recordings, and several handwritten letters sealed inside envelopes bearing my husband's handwriting. The documents painted a story I had never imagined. My husband had uncovered an elaborate financial fraud involving respected business partners who had secretly diverted millions through fake companies. Every payment, every receipt, and every suspicious meeting had been carefully documented. The younger woman appeared repeatedly throughout the files, not as a secret lover, but as someone helping gather evidence while living under constant pressure to remain unnoticed. As each discovery replaced suspicion with understanding, the burden my husband had carried finally became visible. Yet one mystery remained untouched. The hidden compartment contained everything except the explanation he had wanted only me to receive. My eyes drifted toward the hallway, where the locked room still waited behind its silent door. Whatever my husband believed was too important for anyone else to witness, had been waiting there all along, and I finally understood why he had trusted no one except me to open it. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease, as though the door had been waiting patiently for this exact moment. I stood still for several seconds before turning it. Fear had followed me through every discovery inside the penthouse, but this felt different. Whatever waited beyond that door would not simply answer my questions. It would reshape every memory I carried of the man I had loved. The room resembled a private archive rather than a secret retreat. Shelves were lined with carefully labeled binders. A secure cabinet contained encrypted storage devices. A large desk held neatly organized legal files beside a single envelope with my name written in my husband's unmistakable handwriting. I opened the letter before touching anything else. He began by apologizing for the pain his silence would cause. He explained that nearly 2 years earlier, he had uncovered evidence proving several trusted business partners were stealing millions through fraudulent contracts and hidden companies. After quietly reporting his suspicions to financial authorities, he learned the investigation had to remain confidential. The younger woman was not his lover. She was an undercover financial investigator, assigned to gather evidence without alerting those responsible. He feared that if anyone suspected I knew the truth, my safety would be placed at risk. By the time I finished reading, tears blurred every word. The betrayal I had believed was never directed at me. The only secret my husband had kept was the danger surrounding the truth. Over the following weeks, the attorney arranged a formal legal meeting attended by investigators, company directors, and the business partners my husband had trusted for years. The atmosphere remained calm, yet beneath that calm rested undeniable tension. Everyone believed the gathering concerned the distribution of my husband's estate. Few expected anything more. The attorney began presenting documents exactly as my husband had instructed. Financial records matched surveillance footage. Recorded conversations confirmed illegal transfers between shell companies. Internal emails exposed deliberate attempts to conceal missing funds. One piece of evidence strengthened the next, until every denial quietly collapsed beneath the weight of documented facts. The younger woman entered the meeting only after the evidence had already spoken for itself. She calmly identified herself as the financial investigator assigned to work alongside my husband. Every payment appearing on the hidden phone represented authorized investigative expenses approved. Through confidential channels, the accusations that had silently followed me for weeks dissolved without a single dramatic argument. The business partners who had projected confidence throughout the meeting slowly lost every trace of it. Their legal representatives requested private discussions that never changed the outcome. Authorities froze the fraudulent accounts, initiated formal recovery procedures, and secured the remaining evidence according to established legal process. Justice arrived methodically rather than dramatically, exactly as my husband had believed it should. When the final documents were signed, the attorney completed my husband's last instruction: ownership of the penthouse and every protected asset transferred legally into my name. My husband had not hidden an escape from our marriage. He had preserved the truth until it could no longer be manipulated. Several relatives who had questioned my loyalty quietly approached afterward. Their apologies were sincere, yet they could never erase the loneliness those suspicions had created. I accepted their words without bitterness, because carrying resentment would only dishonor the man who had sacrificed everything to protect both justice and me. As I walked out of the building holding my husband's final letter, I realized the investigation had ended, but another journey was only beginning. Now I had to learn how to carry the truth without allowing grief to define the rest of my life. Several months have passed since the investigation ended, yet I still visit the penthouse every week. At first, I believed I would sell it as quickly as possible because every room reminded me of unanswered questions and unbearable grief. Instead, time transformed those memories. The place no longer feels like a monument to secrets. It feels like the final chapter. My husband trusted me to finish with honesty rather than fear. After careful thought, I decided the penthouse would never become a symbol of wealth. With guidance from the attorney and trusted advisors, I established a foundation dedicated to helping families whose lives had been shattered by financial fraud and betrayal. Every family who walks through those doors reminds me that justice is not only about exposing wrongdoing, it is also about helping people rebuild after everything they believed secure has been taken away. I still miss my husband every single day. Some mornings, I instinctively reach for the other side of the bed before remembering he is gone. Grief never disappears completely. It simply changes shape as understanding slowly replaces uncertainty. The questions that once kept me awake have finally been answered, allowing sorrow to exist without bitterness. Looking back, I realize the greatest mistake I made was believing silence always hides betrayal. Sometimes silence protects people until the truth is strong enough to defend itself. My husband never stopped loving me. He carried an impossible burden because he believed shielding me from danger was worth every misunderstanding history might place upon his name.